Everyone, welcome back to another episode of Comes a Time. That is my friend O'Teal.
And that is my friend Mike. We had another one. We keep saying it. This was the best one. I don't even think it's best anymore. It's just like, it's so, what a series of bullseyes. It's like a triple Robin Hood. Someone hits a bullseye, you split that arrow, then you split the arrow again.
Well, you just said it. It's water in the desert. We had our friend and one of my favorite folks to listen to, Michael Meade, the host of the Living Myth podcast, and he's for those of you that have been with us for the long stretch. He was a prior guest, and the moment he left the podcast, we said we need to have him on as often as possible, and no better time than now to have him join us again. It's just amazing how much he has his finger on the pulse of just the consciousness that we need right now. I mean, he finds the stories and the myths and the legends and the everything that humanity has gone through in the past and recorded, and finds the stories that fit what we need. And it's phenomenal what he does. I mean, it's just
Yeah.
unreal what he does, and you'll hear it in this episode.
Yeah, his brain and his heart are truly amazing, both huge and both working in concert with each other.
Yeah.
And it's so much of what he says, you realize it's stuff that we know, but our culture has just so gone off the mark from it.
Right.
And I mean, basically, we got to get back to nature. We're not gonna like find our equilibrium in our own inner nature, completely separate from nature. And
Right.
because we've gotten so far away from it, we see the results of it. But it's not hopeless. It's not hopeless.
No, and I think that the thing he says in this, and like you said, O'Teal, it's the stuff that we kind of already deep down know, right? But we're all in this together,
Yeah.
and we need the community. And whether it's the two of us or the folks that are listening or whatever it may be, like we need to make these communities, and
Yeah. We need to
whether it's
communicate.
one person or 10 people or just a smile every now and then could be the community that someone needs. So yeah, this one was definitely necessary. And
Profound. Profound.
please go listen to his podcast if you
Please.
guys are interested in, I mean, just life. I don't know. It's perfect. It really is kind of ideal, and his voice is perfect, and it's all great.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, Michael, for coming back and joining us, and thank you to everyone who's listening. If you'd like more, we're over at patreon.com/comes a time pod, where we offer you a bonus episode each week. And you're listening to us on Osiris Network. You can check out all their podcasts at osirispod.com. Everyone, stay safe out there. O'Teal, enjoy tour. And thanks for kicking ass up there and bringing us some great tunes.
We're having fun for sure, man.
Nice. Take care, everyone. Be safe.
I grew up being interrupted by five.
Hey, stop talking. We're talking over here.
My mother who never stopped talking.
We grew up in the same family.
See, that's why I'm trying to not do that to my children. Oh,
But
man.
actually, I think it activates more brain synapses.
Yes.
You learn how to navigate confusion.
It's like boxing.
Because I've been with people who don't have that in their family, and they're like really troubled by, wait, would people stop interrupting? Whereas some of us can find the threads that are meaningful in the cacophony, which nowadays is how we all live.
It is.
I think you also learn to tune out stuff better, because I grew up we had kind of a loud family, and there was 4 kids, so 6 people, lots of dominant personalities. And like when there's a lot of mayhem going on, if I need to, I just like it could just be silent. Like I could just like.
You're able to
Yeah.
do that? Oh, that's
I mean,
fantastic.
it's good sometimes. It's bad sometimes. You should
Yeah,
only
it
do it
can
when
be
you should
good
do it.
training. Yeah.
Yeah. You make a great point though, Michael, about like how your brain does kind of you're able to have you know those people that are able to have multiple conversations at once? Like you see some of these folks that literally can it's like juggling, but they're
Mhm.
able to captivate and make eye contact and lock in, but almost somehow magically have two people right there on hold and they're able to it's fascinating to watch that happen, but you're right, some people just kind of crumble and break down when those
Yeah.
moments happen too.
Oh, we're so glad to have you back. I know personally, I've been really uh, looking forward to talking to you since the school shootings happened. And
Mhm.
now, it just kind of puts it on in your awareness that it's every day because a bunch have happened since then. But that, having a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old, it just, it
Whew.
hits me hard. And I feel
Yeah.
like we're witnessing Rome fall, and it's a lot to deal with,
Yeah.
and so we're really glad to have you on, because that's kind of where I wanted to start with you, is like, what do we do with all this, like watching the literal like collapse of our society, and climate and everything.
Yeah. Are we going to keep rolling? Is that
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very unusual time. I don't know that it's ever happened before this way. I mean, the world has fallen apart before. Mythology tells us that.
Yeah.
But to have climate crisis and the collapse of ecosystems happening at the same time as the human cultural world going upside down and having a collapse of institutions is
Yes.
really unusual and really overwhelming. And then the fact that it happens when people have developed the technology of earth-wide, global-wide communication, so that no
Yeah.
matter where you are, you know about all the terror, all
Yeah.
the tragedy, all the collapse going on in other places.
Yeah.
So that because that used to take decades for the information
Yeah.
to travel from one
That's true.
continent to another, and people learned about tragedy as history. And now
Yes.
we're in the tragic time and the tragic moments, and it is naturally overwhelming to the individual human psyche. We were not educated to be conscious and aware of this much tragedy and this much
Yes.
collapse and
Yes.
this much chaos,
Mm.
you
Yeah.
know. And so then part of that for me, then I see that as a weight, as a huge pressure, and that comes down on everyone. So that, I mean, everyone I speak to, and I talk to therapists and all that, clients are all talking about anxiety and
Yeah.
pressures that they feel and overwhelm. But for those who are on the edge, that weight
Yeah.
coming down pushes them over the edge. And then in the United States, for reasons that are tragic all on its own, uh, the availability of automatic weapons
Yeah.
Yeah.
makes it possible for someone who maybe even 10 years earlier might not have gone over the edge to go over and be able to pick up a gun on their way over. And so
Yeah.
then it's as if those automatic weapons are shooting tragedy, yes, but also the void. That's how I started to see it.
Yes.
They're like guns or shooting bullets of the void, uh,
Mm.
in the sense that it's like pure chaos.
Yeah.
And then when they aim it at children, it's beyond lost innocence. It's just perverted. It's cultural perversion, and almost unbearable and unthinkable until it happens. And now it happens again and again.
Again and again, and we watch it as it's happening.
And it's not a desensitization, it's an over
Yeah.
sensitization where it's like you don't even have time to process one before you're hearing about another one happening or seeing another thing happening, and then it's like, oh yeah, and Ukraine is still happening too, and oh
Yeah.
yeah, Lake Meade is drying, and oh yeah, like, and it's just this kind of, how do you compartmentalize the empathy and the processing and the somehow releasing that valve and letting that pressure, like you said, I think pressure is the perfect word, but
Yeah.
I think that's the thing that so many of us are struggling with, is like, where is the valve to kind of let that steam rise, and how to figure that out for ourselves individually.
And then you have a culture, modern culture, and to be modern, I think means to be lost. I think that's the core definition of modern. And it means to have lost cohering stories, so that there isn't a story that people think they're in different stories rather
Yes.
than in one story with a lot of tragedy. But also, there's the loss of meaningful ritual, which is the place that humanity throughout history would take overwhelming things, would to be in, like one good thing that could come out of all this tragedy is a return of real funeral. I mean, funerals were one of the biggest rituals that humans ever invented. And they were traditionally very creative events. In many cultures, you would have the poets and the musicians and everybody that was creative would be involved in making the funeral, because the funeral was supposed to serve for the release of the grief and the agony of loss and begin the return back to life.
Yeah.
And since we don't have those real funerals, the lack of understanding what the presence of death is and so on, then you lose those two things, which is no proper way for everybody to grieve and let loose all the pain, and then no proper way back to life, so that the tragedies that occur, we keep carrying them with us.
Yeah.
Not just that there's more and more of them coming, that we can't get rid of the burden of the ones that have happened because the culture lacks understanding and meaningful ritual.
It's funny you say that, because my father just passed away, and we just had his memorial service, and it was like there's some time in between it, like a week or whatever. He was cremated, so there wasn't a burial, like a traditional funeral, but we had this service. And I noticed afterwards that I felt completely different. Like a chapter had ended, or maybe a whole book had ended and book 2 started, or book 3 or whatever. But it was after the memorial service, not after he died. And now that you say that, I realize, because we did that thing, and it brought everybody together. We went through all these memories. We grieved together. It tied everything. There was music. There was, wow. Now that you
Yeah.
say that, it explains why I felt that drastic change.
Yeah.
You know,
In Africa, they say, if you come upon a funeral, you're expected to join in, not because you knew the person that died, but because you knew death. So a
Wow.
funeral
Communal.
is an engagement with death on an existential level that allows a return to life in a more genuine way. And you think of the second line, which
And
was, oh, go ahead, I'll
Yeah.
say more
Well,
about that. Yeah.
please go ahead. Yeah.
New
Well,
Orleans.
New Orleans still has it.
Yeah.
So that they still have the funeral as, like properly imagined. And so you have usually the horse-drawn carriage and the deceased is in the carriage. So the death is preceding the way to the funeral ground, and everyone is following death because death just tore into life. And behind the carriage with the casket comes the immediate family. And behind them, the extension of friends, and behind them, everyone else who's involved. And they all go down, and then a dirge is played. And the function of dirge is to open the gates of sorrow and grief. And so that's done, the body's buried, everyone turns around, and now the family's at the back, the friends are in front of them, the extended community is in front of them, and in front of everybody is the band. And on the way back, they play the way back into life, usually by the Saints Are Marching In. That is it. That's it.
And
Encapsulated.
death is at the very back.
And the more, death is at
Behind
the
the
back,
family.
and everybody's returning back to life. And of
Right.
course, the family's going to get there slower because they're more impacted. But the purpose of funeral was to remind the living they're alive.
Yeah.
And so anyway, then when the bigger the tragedy, the bigger the funeral needs to be. And now again, the strange modern thing, the tragedies are international automatically. So it's like we're in these big funerals that are incomplete. And so a different kind of pressure and the weight and so on.
And this follows 2 years of family members having to stand outside of a hospital and maybe wave through a window or say goodbye on Zoom or FaceTime and not have that actual experience of being with their loved one when they pass away due to COVID and all of that. I mean, that's when you were saying that, that's what I was thinking about, was all these folks who lost loved ones to, COVID, or someone who died in a hospital or in a senior home and their family literally couldn't, they had to die alone. So there was that huge change in the way that we processed and experienced death with the pandemic, and then coming out of it now, we're still kind of trying to figure it.
Yeah, people are just beat down. That's why there's so many suicides and overdoses, and it's like, it feels like we could really use a global funeral, like something that involves, the turning back the other way. Now the band is at the front and play us back into life, because everybody is just, we're not having it. And I think that's when you don't turn back to life, that's when the suicide and the overdose is the alternative. Right?
When I first started working with severely at-risk youth, and it was in the hood and in the barrio, and death was constant there. Different than the suburbs where it's reserved and kept in the funeral homes. In many of the neighborhoods, in the morning you get up and you walk around the chalk figures drawn on the ground where someone died. And the school kids are going to school and walking around the ghost chalk figures of recently died people on the ground. And so it's like we had to start doing funerals right in the neighborhoods like that, and especially with the youth, because a lot of the at-risk kids will have, by 17, they have 5, 6, 8 friends who have died, and they're bearing that death. It's very dangerous, and it's really a trigger to suicide. Because the old idea, part of what funeral does is close the door on death. So whenever there's a sudden death or a tragic death or a violent death, this is the old imagination, the doors of death are thrown wide open. And that's why one suicide can trigger another one. It's also why one mass shooting triggers another one. And they're following a script now too, that's made clear. And so when there isn't a closing of the door of death, there's a bigger pull towards death. And so the average funeral took 3 days. The universal average was 3 days. Wow. And in ancient cultures, everything had to stop. Everyone went to the funeral. The death of one brought death present. And on one hand, everybody had to witness death. And on the other hand, everybody had to find a way back from death. And so that's one of the few things that might come out of, the kind of procession of disasters that we're living in.
That's a great way to put it. Procession of disasters is exactly right.
Yeah.
I was listening to, I think I may have told you last time you joined us that I tend to listen to you when I'm driving. And a lot of times that's at 1, 2, 3 in the morning, out of Manhattan. So it's kind of perfect that you're there with me. But you said something a couple weeks ago, and it struck me, and like, I mean, it shook me, and it was so true. You said, you know, a lot of these folks are saying we can't wait to get back to normal. And the biggest issue with that is there's never going to be going
No.
back to normal. There's only forward or stagnant at this point. I'm paraphrasing, but you remember, like,
Yeah.
and I thought that was so important because you do hear people go, I just can't wait for things to go back. It's nothing's ever going to be the same.
Well, we wouldn't want to because normal is what got us in this predicament.
Right, exactly.
Right.
But I thought that
Normal
was,
is what was opening the doors of tragedy for some, while others were denying it was happening.
yeah,
Yeah. But so
Yeah.
mythologically, that's, you know, it's interesting to me because in myth, these kind of things are prefigured. And so, you know, for a while, I've been focused at times on apocalyptic myths, not zombie stories, which are like the dumbed down version of apocalypse. But the old idea that apocalypse has to do with collapse and renewal, and it has to do with end and beginning. And so one of the ideas inside apocalypse, the word can mean to lift the veil. So one of the things that's happening with these tragedies is the veils lift, and you realize now more people know how many guns are in the United States, you know, more than people. And then the veil lifts a little bit more, and you see how troubled young people are and how close they are, because those mass shootings, especially the 7 out of 8 recent ones, are boys aged between 17 and 21, and they're actually murder suicides
Yeah.
because they either kill themselves or there's this old idea called suicide by cops.
Yeah.
And so it's really an annihilation of others on the way to self-annihilation. And so, it says something symptomatically about the culture, not just the culture of guns, but the culture of suicide, and the culture of more young people having trouble making the transition from childhood into a more conscious life. You know, which is clearly a huge symptom in modern culture.
Yeah, we don't have the what's the word I'm looking for? It's close to infrastructure. Just not provided. You know, everybody of the other cultures have these rites of passage, and you know, ours is like shopping or scrolling, or you know, I mean, it's not. We don't have the.
the
We're not.
dopamine.
Yeah, we're not being taught how
Yeah.
to.
Well, and also, I mean, you know, to the point of a lot of these shooters being in that, you know, eh, eh, like approaching adulthood or, you know, exiting childhood. I mean, the things that they're bombarded with, I mean, just watching essentially the world disintegrate, watching the, you know, the actual planet melt, and seeing these wars and just seeing violence and seeing anger and just a 50-50 split on everything. That's hard for a young brain to process. That's hard for any brain to process, but
And the climate crisis too, on top of
right.
that.
Yeah.
I mean,
The whole atmosphere, from the literal atmosphere to the atmosphere of tragedy, is pervading all young people growing up, because they cannot resist it. They breathe it in. That's the problem with being adolescent, for instance. Smaller kids can find ways around it, and they can be distracted or be kept protected from it in a way. But once you hit adolescence, there's this kind of inhalation of the atmosphere of a culture that happens, and there's no defense for it, because it's supposed to be part of growing up, because the child is no longer simply the child of the family. It's now becoming the adolescent child of the community. And so it inhales the problems of the community. And so, yeah, I mean, young people are devastated. The idea that the planet may not continue, that the earth may not, that's devastating without stories and ideas that give them a chance to hold it and consider it. And so it's all contributing, to this procession of tragedies that everyone now knows is not over. There used to be the
worst
pretend
is,
that, oh, that was really bad. We know it's coming, and not just one, but more. And now, and then you have the inaction and the inability of the culture to respond to its own tragedies. And that's, I call that the hollowing of the institutions, where the institutions, politics, churches, schools, which can now become the locale of the tragedy, don't know how to handle it.
so what do we do then? Do we turn to like the micro instead as we watch the macro fail? Like, do we just, because if the institutions are not able to help us get through, do we just pull together in your, family, friends, close? I'm just trying to think like, what do we do as it all comes down?
Yeah, I think that's the right instinct. So it turns out it's very hard for a nation like the United States, a big nation, and these nation states, and these big that are effectively, big machineries, cannot move or change fast.
Yeah.
So we have to get more local about that. And I think we have to find ways to create what's missing. So I call it sudden community. Not the idea that we're building a community and we don't know what's going to happen in the future. That's the big lesson right now. Who knows right now, literally, regarding climate or culture. And so I call it sudden community, the old Latin word communitas, which means something so deep happens that it pulls everyone together. That's the function of a funeral. Only there needs to be more consciousness in it and more understanding. And inside that process, more care for each other, like keeping an eye out for who's on the edge, because more people are being pushed to the edge. And right in a town like Uvalde there, where the last mass shooting was, there are other kids on the same similar edge. And so the process, if it's not just a moment of silence, and if it's not just a few hour funeral, but it's a period of really paying attention to the presence of death and the need to find ways back to life. And then those who know something about what's going on, checking for those who are more at risk, that's part of it. And then maybe that begins to filter more into the bigger collective with regard to, obviously making guns less available. That's just so obvious. And the people that are in denial about that are in denial of death as well. And so, that's a whole other problem. But
you bring up a point that I really wanted to touch on, which is, the first thing that I always ask myself when I hear this is like, how did they not know this kid was that on the edge? Like my kids, we watch them so closely. We talk to them. We're trying to find out more, trying to get them, to engage with us even more. I just can't imagine one of my kids being that close to the edge, and I was completely. It seems to me there had to be some denial. Like, you can't be that oblivious, right? Or are they just so overwhelmed and working two jobs or whatever?
Well, the story has come out to a large degree. It was a broken family with a lot of abuse. And there were signs, from a couple of years before. Family noticed, friends noticed. And so there's a kind of denial. There's also a kind of lack of awareness of what those signs mean. And then who and how is an intervention occur? Like in contemporary life, it's not clear where the parents' responsibilities end and the schools begin. There's a real confusion there, and there's not necessarily good communication. And then it's all disrupted by political issues and issues of self-importance versus trying to protect and assist the kids to grow. on and on.
Right. And the thing that happens too in these communities, and it spreads, it's kind of like when you know, like a spider web crack, or like a windshield like how it splinters out, there's going to be children that have survivor's guilt. There's going to be teachers that have, I could have done something more. There's parents who, if I only got there a couple minutes early, there's all these ifs and what ifs, and that's a haunt that's going to stay with them for a lifetime. And those folks need the support and the, you know, coping mechanisms, the therapy, whatever they need to cope with this experience and move forward. And if it keeps happening, and they showed a map of the United States, and it was all these different, like, it was like looking at like a weather chart, and it was just numbers, and it's dead people, and it's like, this is what. So
maybe this is to force us back into the village thing. Do you think? Because I always hear it like it takes a village, and it does. Like, when you're raising kids, like, it's overwhelming. That's why it takes a village. But we're so separate. Maybe all this is, like you say, the lifting of the veil is going to force us to be back into this village thing where we go, okay, he's having problems, but let's not just like paper over this, because this could end up becoming a school shooting. Like, let's deal with it.
Yeah. I agree. I think it is trying to do. There's an old idea that after a symptom persists, it becomes more important to not look simply at the cause of the symptom, look at the aim of the symptom. And so that's what I think you were just saying. The aim of the fracturing of community is to remake community. The secret aim of the divisions in a culture is to find a new creative way to be together.
Yes.
Tragedy is there. People think of tragedy as bringing everyone together. When it's a natural disaster, that often happens.
Yeah.
But we're now in this procession of tragedies. And so there has to be some imagination of where it's trying to get us to go. And so,
but culturally, we don't look at it that way, because when you think about a symptom, what do we do for a symptom? We want to make the symptom go away, not cure the cause. But the aim of the symptom is to go, hey, fix the problem. Not to go make me go away. It's like, I'm trying to save your life, man. Like, I'm going to be back, and if you don't fix it either,
Yeah, and apparently, I don't know why, but it takes this much tragedy to create that awakening. I was saying that actually 10 years ago, because I was working with kids in the street, and I was saying, these are 15 and 16-year-olds. It's still happening in the inner city, so-called, that are dying and that are walking with death every day, and nothing's being done about it. And so this is bound to cause more tragedy. And then when the first shootings, Columbine and all, were happening, what I was writing about is death goes to school. It was simpler then in some sense, because it wasn't this real procession of unbearable tragedy, but it was shock of tragedy. And one of my interpretations was, this is a culture that typically denies death. And Octavio Paz, the great Mexican poet, said, a culture that begins by denying death will end by denying life. That's also happening literally right now. There is denying of life going on.
Sure.
And so there's been this progression, and it's getting worse, and it has to be at some point that's enough. And you hear people saying now, in a kind of political way, enough is enough regarding, weapons of war being distributed in the street. But there's way more of enough is enough.
Right.
It's got to get to the point where this is enough division. This is enough self-oriented politics. This is enough.
It's going to have to be a lot of enough, man, because the true religion of this country is profit, and that is so big. Like, it's going to be a whole lot of enoughs. It's going to take a whole lot of enoughs to fight against that, huge of a wave.
Yeah, that's kind of the god of modern culture. There's actually twin god, money and time. That's the other one. Everybody's trapped in time,
Yeah.
and there's very little healing in time. When healing is happening, it's timeless. You're out of time in the healing mode. You can't tell how much time it took, and so the sad thing, in a way, for me, is there's no small fix. There's no minimal repair. This is a reimagination of culture that's being required. And evidently it takes this much tragedy to begin it, or to get more
America.
people aware
And
of it.
has in the stories and like, you know, from the past and what you study, when the earth, when humanity has seen this procession, um, what has happened? Like, what is some of the stories that, like, from the past, that how did the earth rise from its own ashes? And, you know, are there any particular stories if anyone wants to go read some?
Yeah, there are many. So there's a group of stories that I've been focusing on lately called the Earth Diver myths. Earth Diver. And so they are usually called creation stories. I call them recreation stories because they're not simply about the beginning of the world. They're about the re-beginning of the world. They function in culture that there are myths of recreation. And so one of the characteristics of Earth Diver myths is the Earth has been overwhelmed with flood, and it's been lost in darkness, and it has to be found at the bottom of the eternal dark ocean. And so that's a process that depicts descent. And like at the beginning of COVID, I was writing that this is a descent into darkness that we didn't choose, but we have to accept. And so because in accepting it, we find out what's there for us. So the background for a lot of this is rite of passage, because rite of passage begins with separation. You're separated from everybody. The family that has the tragic death is separated from everybody. They don't feel connected. They feel pulled into that darkness. The individual that has COVID is separated from everybody. And so on and so forth. There's separation all over the place. Besides polarization, there's actual separation as a
That's
daily
true.
experience. Well, in the mythology of transformation, that's the first step of the rite of passage, separation. The second step is a descent into darkness with a brush with death. So that's a way to describe where we're at collectively.
Yeah,
More than a brush with death, more than.
So we're in an enormous rite of passage, and
That's what I think.
the scariest dark part.
A collective rite of passage.
Yeah.
And then the two things that happen in that descent, like when the story says the earth is found in the depths, and then when it's brought up, as soon as it's handled at the surface above the dark, deepening depths of things, it grows. That's how the earth comes back. In one of the best stories, a woman falls from the sky, who turns out to be the one who calls for the earth to be brought up. And then when she touches it, it begins to spread out and it becomes a living earth again. But when you take that personally, you say that the descent that we're all being pulled into, every time we hear about a tragedy, most of us are pulled into the depths. But so the corresponding thing for the individual would be at the depth of our own psyche, there is creative mud trying to become conscious and be brought up. So it's another way of thinking, what do? We can't individually affect the collective. It doesn't work that way. Look at the inability to affect politics. But if more people are finding what's down in their own depths, so psychology doesn't always mirror mythology, but in mythology, the deep depths are always creative. What's at the bottom is not emptiness, but creative energy trying to become conscious through each one of us. And so this isn't a quick fix, but then again, it's not a minor repair. if enough people are willing to keep going down and finding things and bringing them back up, all of a sudden it turns out that one of those people actually knows a heck of a lot about funerals, and all of a sudden is helping people to do the proper work of funerals. Another one knows how to cure certain kind of things and can figure that. Another one knows how to replant arid ground and turn it into forests. And so suddenly, not so suddenly, but eventually, the accumulation of those creative efforts begins to affect the collective. That's how the myths talk about it.
So we got to get down in there together, and not like, maybe literally and metaphorically speaking, like take a pill for it. You get down in the muck, because the muck is also the fertilizer.
Down in
You
the
can't,
mud
like,
where the truth
escape it.
is.
Where
Yeah.
the truth is. Yeah.
The
that's
truth
it.
is not an agreement in public. It's a
Right.
Yes.
it's the arisement of inspiration from the depths.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there's something true about young people that are growing into this world falling apart. There's truth about what's happening to them that hasn't been uncovered yet in a way that can be pronounced clearly.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that process cannot completely be done by them, because in a rite of passage, you have to have those that are suffering descent, and those that are helping keep things together while that's happening.
Yes.
And then, like in a vision quest, those who help interpret what happened to those who experienced it afterwards. And so there's a bunch of truth trying to enter. I mean,
Yeah.
real truth, deep
And we're
truth.
missing the two of the biggest things: those trying to help you during the descent, and those to interpret. Like, our culture just doesn't, it's not willing to do. That's what I'm trying to get at, is like, maybe what I'm looking for is, we have to teach our kids to not try to deny, like, getting down the muck. Like, we're going to go down there with you together. I'm going to help you. There's part of it you're going to have to do by yourself, and it's going to feel dangerous, but I'm here to help you, and also to help you interpret on the other side. Because otherwise,
there's one more thing missing that's really important. And this is why it's so clear where we started from. You can't go back, because when you come out, when you come through, there has to be a community of people waiting,
yes,
who have an understanding of what you've gone through and a capacity to welcome you into the new community, into the new world, if you want. That's the end of the rite of passage, so that it only concludes when people are welcomed back. And so the paradox is that we have a cultural community that's torn apart, when we need a community that suffers through things with those who are being hit the hardest, and then who welcomes them back.
well,
And
that's why we have the problem. Yeah.
Well,
that's why I
the
call it
thing that's-
sudden community.
Yeah.
Because you can pull people together to do a certain thing for someone or for some group. I mean, you see people trying to do it in the places where the tragedy is. You see them trying to make sacred ground where people have died and all, but way more is needed than that.
Well, it's hard collectively, because this country and its foundation was that. There was a whole segment of community that they didn't give a crap about, and was actually written into the law that these people are not even people.
Yep.
Right? And they're still suffering in the hoods and barrios and reservations and stuff. So trying to get everybody collectively to be the community that's waiting for you on the other side is damn near impossible, because it never existed here, ever, since the foundation. So how do we do it now? Like, it wasn't baked into the cake.
It really can happen. I haven't experienced it.
I mean, I believe you, but
I have, but it's really a transition of humanity.
Yeah.
Not just a local community. It's really and what's required is an awakening of a deeper sense of humanity that doesn't allow for some to be rejected or made into the other.
Yeah.
Because it has to include the other. And so America has this ongoing tragedy from the very beginning. On the one hand, the annihilation of the indigenous people, practical annihilation, which still isn't acknowledged in many ways. And on the other, slavery, the enslavement of another people, pretending that neither of those are human, which is absolutely inhuman and proof of the lack of humanity of those who are holding those ideas. So that has to turn completely over.
And also poor whites and just the poor women.
Poor and
there's
all the indentured in the various ways. So it's really a rite of passage of humanity, trying to find the depth of humanity again, which seems really big, but I trust in that just because of events we've done where we intentionally bring together people of different races and different ethnicities and different cultural backgrounds and different economic backgrounds, and try to do healing. And there is a process of awakening that's stunning, where you realize, no, we really are in this all together.
Yeah, we
are. Because we're human all together, and that's that's
the same air. If all the air is polluted, we all die. Not just this group or that group or this sex or that one.
Well, and what's so important too is that you could find community in just one person right now. From spending so much time alone or spending so much time isolated, if you find one person that has that same frequency of empathy or vulnerability, or just the willingness to say, I don't know what's going on, but you don't have to go through it alone. That right there could be a life raft. And that right there could be the beginning of a sudden community. Or
that's what this podcast is, right? That's why we want you on the podcast. That we don't have a lot of followers, but that ripple, just if a few people can watch and get a hold of this, and we can reach out to each other. That's how you save it,
No, that's a good point. If you follow a vision quest, there is often the person coming back from having been isolated, literally inside a circle that's drawn with little or no nourishment, so that they awaken to something that's in them. That's what the vision is about, even though it might be occasioned by the appearance of an animal or something. What's trying to awaken is within. And then, some of the practices are that you would go to another person who knew that process, and then could help elicit the understanding and make clear how to hold on to it. And that was a community of spirit right there.
It seems that it's so polarized. Like everything, the thing that seems so visibly and emotionally right on the surface is, we need community, but there's so much separation. We need empathy, but there's so much fear. We need, their agreement and disagreement are almost of the same value now, just because it elicits some vitriol or fist bump, and you agree with the side I agree with, and there's that area in the middle where we go, okay, well, I don't know, I don't want to sound, I just remember there being a time where you could figure out a way to coexist, maybe even on a small level. On a small level, no, but even
but like
I don't
micro.
mean
but
micro.
No, you're
I don't
right.
mean
That's
I don't
why,
mean the country. I mean
that's why we have to go micro, right?
I'll be in line at the grocery store, and it's like this person. Like, I like to talk to people. I want to be friendly with people, but now I kind of have to take a beat and go, I don't know if I want to get into it right now. Like, who is, and that's it's kind of a crummy way to.
I know, it's sad,
but it's all right there. It's one side and the other, and it's just it's rough.
I just feel like if we reach out micro, it'll ripple out, and maybe that's what all this is teaching. It's like
perhaps
when you said something about the vision quest, I was like, like collectively, our vision is this horror. But okay, if that makes us get to, like, just okay, let's just do this micro thing right here with my neighbors, friends, the podcasts, people at work, like just start here and
Yeah.
hopefully it'll ripple out and where we can talk. Because if we don't learn to talk to each other, we're never going to see each other. I see the left do it just as much to the right. It's like, how are you going to ever talk to them or have compassion with them if you're going to demonize them like that? When do we start talking?
One of the things here,
You know?
and I think you're alluding to it with like being in the grocery line and saying, well, if I say something, where might it lead?
Yeah.
It's like, people in
Can of
Texas, I
worms.
worry about people in Texas a lot, because you can bear any kind of arm in the grocery store. Oh my God. Not a good plan. But so one idea that's to me very valuable is the tension of the opposites. So in Earth Diver stories, after the Earth is brought up, and the woman who fell from the sky in those stories is the image of the creator. And so these are stories with a feminine creator, which is really interesting because she becomes Mother Earth. But she gives birth to two twins who are directly opposite each other. And sometimes they're called the hard brother and the gentle brother, or sapling, flinty and sapling, or bad mind and good mind. They're metaphors.
Yeah.
And creation continues with the two of them creating in two different directions. This is the explanation of how opposites got into the world.
Yeah.
And then eventually the two of them have a fight, and because they're creating in opposite ways. And so we're like those two twins having a fight in public right now. And people can't hear the other side, and they're demonizing the other side because each side thinks they're the good twin and the other one's the bad twin, anyway, that's hard to sort out, but that's in the stories.
Wow.
And then in the fight, what happens is the woman who fell from the sky, who becomes the earth, her body, she breaks giving birth to them, and she becomes the earth, and so when the bad brother, which everybody has to figure out who that is, but it really is about inside people. Everybody has the good twin and the bad twin.
And that we're both the good and the bad brother. That's the thing.
That's helpful to know. So when, because then people can't be as one-sided. But anyway, so the hard twin is beating the gentle twin. And the world, this is an old idea, the world is tipped towards goodness slightly. Mm-hmm. What happens is their mother speaks to the good twin who's being pounded into the earth. He's closer to her. And she says, you cannot be defeated. You cannot let yourself be defeated, because it will end creation, and creation won't be able to continue. And so you have to do this in order to help creation continue. And he gets encouraged and inspirited by her. And then he beats the other twin, but he can't really kill him. He drives him out of the earth, really, and he winds up becoming death. He then he becomes death. So now you see that they were really life and death, which are the twin brothers.
The sun going up and coming down. Yeah.
And death has to have its place. And when death doesn't have a place, it shows up at school, and it shows up in the supermarkets with automatic weapons. Mm-hmm. Death has to have its place. But also, the polarization is the attempt by, I guess, the unconscious or something, to get people to realize the twin brothers are inside us. Everybody's carrying the good and bad, and whoever calls the others bad is really casting their inner dark ignorance on someone else in order to have a moment or a few years or a few hundred years of pretending they weren't in it and didn't have it in them. And so we're being forced to face this stuff now. And it really makes sense to go back to the old stories and this is a tough one for people. I mean, it's tough because some people are determined the other person is bad, and some people are simply determined that they're good and they're above the dark urges and the dark thoughts. And that's as big a problem as insisting that all the dark thoughts are going to other people. They're both problems.
Right. But also paints them into a corner like they can never change.
Yeah.
Like say they are bad, whatever we want to define.
Yeah.
As bad. That doesn't mean they can't change. Like I can't write someone else totally off because I changed.
Right.
Like, you know, if and
That's the only constant in life, right? Is change. I mean,
yeah,
that's the only thing
Yes.
we're guaranteed is that and
and,
death.
and we know it's that neither of us are going to change, or our relationship is not going to change if we don't talk. And if we write each other off, there's definitely not going to be talking, and then there's going to be war. Like you say, if you don't make a place, it's going to.
So then we have to listen to each other, but that only happens when the truth is being told. So there is no mechanism and there is no therapeutic office in which that conversation can happen. It has to happen right in life, and it has to be a digging down for that truth that's at the bottom. Then people will listen if the truth is told at the right time. But it has to be not
Yeah.
the truths of politics or the truths
Yeah.
of the factual world. It has to be those deeper truths that we know instinctively that have to become a lived truth, like we are all in this together, is a really good phrase, but only if it's being lived.
Right.
Otherwise, it's just a placard.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not the truth that the ad agencies decide that you get because you clicked on a certain thing, which is terrifying. At what point did, like, was there a period where, it seems like youth, and I can only speak from my experience, but I wasn't taught about death until someone died. Do you know what I mean? And it was more kind of like hey, they're not going to be here anymore, or they went to heaven, or was there a period? Was that always the case where it was like you shielded children until they experienced it? No.
No, I
That's
mean, think
not,
about people growing up on farms. Like, you see
yeah.
animals die, you see animals kill each other. If we're more attached to nature, death is like
It's
you're seeing
everywhere.
it daily almost, right?
That's modern culture,
Yeah.
denying death.
Denying
And,
death.
The
and it
chicken
starts off,
nuggets, you don't see the chickens get
No,
slaughtered.
you
You
don't
just see the little
see it.
nuggets,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
No.
When they say
Yeah.
the ancient idea, everyone goes to the funeral, that means the infants and the children are all in the funeral. The people of all ages are in the funeral, and often at a funeral, and you don't know who died. So then
Yeah.
imagine the conversations with the kids. So the kids say, why are we here? Well, someone died. Who are they? Well, we don't really know that well. But listen, death is part of life. And so then the kids are growing up getting ideas about death as they
Yeah.
grow. So then when someone says you have to die before you die, that starts to make sense. That's the old saying,
Mm.
die before you die. It means
Yeah.
die little deaths, because each time you die a little death, you have a bigger life. And so all these sayings from the past, the Irish have a saying, death is the middle of a long life. Which means if you don't
Wow.
die in the middle of your life,
Yeah.
you may be alive, but you may be the walking dead.
Hmm.
I think the popular images of zombie revolution and the walking dead is really a dumbed down version of people living but not really living.
It's what we're
And
doing right now.
yeah, it's really the public square being referred to.
Yeah.
But so no, I don't. This is modern. The
Yeah.
idea of denying death, and I agree. Imagine all the cultures, most of history, people were closer to nature,
Yeah.
and nature is the big mystery lived large, and the mystery is birth, death, rebirth,
Yeah.
life,
Yes.
death, renewal, and nature is showing it,
Every
and
year.
and human nature is part of it, and the modern world has separated humans from the natural world, and therefore most people in the modern world do not know that the mystery is really life, death, renewal.
Yeah.
People
So
don't know
then
it.
this is, I won't say good, but it's necessary because it's forcing us
The whole
back to
world.
nature, where we will then see. Because, like with my kids, I really struggled. I was like, how am I going to talk about? Because I have a weird thing about death. I avoid it, and I avoid funerals and just the whole nine. It's always, I've spent a life doing that. And then when I had Nigel, it was like, oh, there's a dead bug, there's a dead lizard, there's a dead bird, there's a dead fish. That wasn't hard. He's like, he understands it's never going to move again.
Hmm.
And so when I talk about death, it's more about living. Let's do this because, at some point we don't know how long we have to live. So let's like really live right now. Let's take advantage.
That's what funeral is supposed to show.
Hmm.
And like when we're working with young people who have lost these dead friends, and I want to throw this in because I was thinking of it earlier, you can always re-funeral. So if you get the idea that people would all go to a funeral, whoever funeral it was, it meant that the next funeral you go to, which could be just a neighbor or community person you don't know that well, you're revisiting the funeral of those you did know who died. So
Yes.
that a funeral is not a one-time thing. And
Yeah.
so like
You can get remarried.
with people that couldn't do the funeral in COVID, they can do it now.
Right.
And we've done that with people. You take something that belonged to the person who died and you make a little grave somewhere and you make the funeral and you bury it in the earth, and the feelings can come just as they would have at the original funeral, maybe more so. And so the idea was it was never one thing, a funeral. In order to let someone go, we have to bury them a number of times. And that process of burying is then also the process of re-enlivening oneself.
Yeah.
And working with kids that have lost, friends through violence, one of the things that became important to communicate to them was your dead friend will never live again, as you were saying, but that dead friend wants you to live fully.
Yes.
So the idea is not to be pulled down by that. The idea is to be inspired by that. And sure enough, we would hear from them that they're having dreams of the friend who died. And the dreams are not funeral dreams. They're dreams about being alive. And so this is the kind of thing that's been lost in modern culture. And so there's a big recovery project of bringing things that have things that are forgotten that are important don't disappear. They fall to the bottom and we have to go down there and get them. And that's, and by the way, the process of going down and getting it is what lifts the spirit.
Together,
words,
especially when we do it together, right?
Or even individually.
That's a great point.
That what's missing in my life psychologically and mythologically is hidden deep down inside me. Not something, marketing doesn't work that well if you're really changing yourself. The marketing is based on the idea that you can purchase the change that you need.
Right.
But if we're bringing it up from inside ourselves as it comes up, life rises with it. Literally, life rises with it. And then in the midst of the awareness of death, the kind of familiarity in a sense with funeral, you start to get the rebirth part of the mystery. And
you know what? You just gave me a great idea, that a dream. Maybe this can happen one day where we reimagine a festival, right? But I'm just going to dream out loud, like really big. But what if we had like a festival that is a huge funeral, but now we're not going to market it as a depressing funeral, but like the New Orleans, like what you're talking about, the second line where obviously I would be the music part, but where someone like you could lead us through this process where it's something we could all do together, and then turn us around and face us back towards life and march on. Because it's just like, you said something earlier about the industrial invasion of the arts, I think is what and I was like, like all the art used to be in service of the sacred, but now it's become just like business. So what if we like flip it back and like take the festival and like do that thing consciously where everybody knows, look, we're missing this. Why don't we try to like do this ceremony,
Rebirth.
we've done it. It actually, I mean, it really
it works, doesn't it?
It works. I'm thinking of one time where we did this retreat. We had about 55 or so kids from gangs, different gangs, and we had brought them together because we were working in their neighborhoods. And then we had maybe 40 adults involved, and it got really deep and really heavy. and a lot of these kids had lost friends and all. And so we started doing funerals for their friends. It's not hard to do. And we were in a remote camp and no one's interfering with us. So we're getting them to finally let their grief come into them and then release all the sorrow and all. And it really is beautiful. And you see them coming back to life because they've been carrying corpses. And so then we had planned to go into a nearby town afterwards and do some kind of presentation. And it happened to be a town where it was a very diverse town with lots of different ethnicities present. And at the last minute, we decided we would do a procession through town. We made mock coffins, the kids made them, and little coffins, and on the sides of them, they painted and they wrote things, and it was the coffins of their friends. And then we had a bunch of musicians. So we had we went through town with actually a band at the front playing, because that brought everybody out of the houses. And then behind came gang kids tatted up and everything, carrying coffins of their friends.
That's
and
amazing.
then at a certain signal, we would stop and they would drop to their knees holding the coffins. And everybody understood it. These were people from different cultures who knew tragedy, knew
It's
loss.
universal.
So everybody
Yeah.
came out and joined this procession.
Holy
It was an
cow.
amazing, and there was
That's
no
right.
communication except for the song and the procession.
Mhm.
That's
So there's
beautiful.
a case. And at the end, we ended up in a park, and it was that thing we've all been talking about. It was community. People didn't even speak English and they were in community. We were all together. We knew we were all together. And those
Yeah.
kids who had come into the retreat carrying heavy shadows were the center of the rebirth of the community, because everyone wanted to talk to them. And they went from kneeling with the weight of their friends' coffins to standing in the middle of this momentary community as the pronouncing what they had to say to everyone, because they were the example of returning to life, because
That's
they were
beautiful.
returning to their own life. So
So that's the sudden community you were talking about.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
That's so cool, man.
And the thing to me that's so important about that, what you just said, is that who knows how much that experience impacted maybe just one or two of those youths that took part in that event, and is going to carry that on, and they're going to be a huge conduit for change.
Oh yeah.
Maybe
It's
in
gonna
their
ripple out.
family, maybe in their school. So
Yeah.
we talk about that spider web of negative, the pain, but there's also the spider webbing of love and hope, and that's and positivity. That's
tag
amazing.
something on, because you're so right. We don't know. I've lost touch with, I would say, almost all of them. This is years ago. But one of them came up to me at the end, or in the midst of all this, and said, listen, I got a problem. He was probably 16 from, I forget the exact neighborhood, but from like East Palo Alto. So he's from a Black community. And he says, I said, what's the problem? He said, well, tell you the truth, I'm packing a gun. And I said, all right, what's the problem with that? He said, I'm supposed to go use it. Someone shot my friend and I'm expected to do the payback.
Italian.
And so when this is over, I'm going back to a place where everyone knows I'm armed and everyone expects me to kill someone. So I said, so what's the problem? And he said, the problem is, do I do it or not? And I said, the answer is completely clear. And he said, what do you mean? I said, there's no way you can do it. You've just been with death and come back to life. You can't turn around and fire death into anyone else. That's it. And big pause, he's thinking it over. And then anyway, so some of us wound up going with him back to that community. We had to meet with the OGs who are, in charge of that side of the community, and agree, work it out, that don't put this on him.
Wow.
And I happen to know that he made it into college, and I don't know what happened after that. But your comment may be,
That's amazing.
want to say that. There was one kid, and the actual moment of burying and coming to life, because he was burying the friend who had been shot. And then he stepped out of that cycle where he was supposed to deliver death to someone else. And at least for that time, he was free of that. And he was more fully alive and able to pursue his own life. So I want to echo what you said. Those are transformative things.
Wow.
Every time there's a shooting, something like that can actually be happening. And you know, we don't know, but
Right.
it's a proper human response to tragedy.
Well, he probably would not have done that if he hadn't been through that experience. And then the community is there at the end.
No,
and
he
what
was
did he
going
do?
back.
He went to someone in the community and go, I got a
Yeah.
problem. Like I'm supposed to, you know, and the community, which you said, you know what the answer is. You can't do that. You just been through.
Yeah.
That's just great, man.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And you know what that is? That he got permission to say, I'm scared, help me. And that's such
Yeah,
a
I got a
vulnerable.
problem.
Thank you. Oh my
And for
God.
those
man.
who do mentoring or counseling, in that moment, that's not psychological theory. That's not the time to apply psychological therapy. That's the time to tell the truth.
Tell the truth.
Because he came to me having to sell someone, and under pressure, he would have realized he already knew the answer.
Right.
And all I was doing was saying, in a sense, you wouldn't be telling me if you didn't expect
Already
me to
know.
say, you can't do it.
Right.
So that's not a tricky thing from a mentoring point of view, because it was built into the situation.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. The wealth that you bring everybody, it's just, I can't thank you enough for
I'm so
spending.
grateful for you, man.
You know,
Seriously.
and even just what I'm going to take from the conversation today is that, you know, when you talk about the earth divers and going down and picking up the real truth and all of that, that journey to the bottom and finding it in the mud and bringing it back up, that's another way I feel like I can look at some of those hard days and some of those struggles and some of those when you're so brought to the present moment with like, I don't know what to do. That is the swimming down to
That's
the
it.
bottom. And that's
the edge for diving down. The old saying is, when you find yourself in a descent, dive. That
I like
there's
that.
something down there
Keep
that's
going.
wanting to be found. I want to say one other thing about that event, which still lives inside me because of what you were saying earlier. In that event, there was a complete inburst of arguing through racism that was affecting everybody who was at that event in different ways. And we had one rule in the event, which was no physical violence. And so that meant everything could come out. And so that young man had also just been through his first experience of really having a genuine conversation about racism and the damage that it does and how it denies people and people like him their natural humanity. And so that had been part of it also. So the truth had been spoken in many ways before the other things happened. And I think that put him closer to a truth in himself, because the truth for him was he didn't come here to shoot someone on the basis of payback. He was going to find another way to deal with his friend dying.
Yeah.
So we need to normalize truth and honesty. Wow. Thank you so much for spending an hour with us. And
great to be with you again. Both of you, great to see you.
Yeah, it's truly an honor. And please come back again soon. And for those who are hearing you on our podcast for the first time, can you let them know where they can find you and everything that's going on?
The website is Mosaic Voices, all one word, mosaicvoices.org. Or else they can look for Living Myth, which is the podcast that comes out every week. And they'll find stuff there, stuff to listen to, stuff to read.
Bless you, sir.
For everything.
All right back to you. Good to be with you.
Stay safe.
Good to be in the feeling together.
Yes. Let's keep it up. We'll keep checking in periodically.
All right.
Thank you for listening, everyone.
All right. Be well.